This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to a new season of Adventures in Compliance. This season, we're going to take up the second set of 12 short stories published in the Strand magazine in 1893 and 1894, which were collected in the book The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes was published in the United Kingdom by G. Loons and in the U.S. by Harper's and Brothers. It's the second collection featuring the consultative detective Sherlock Holmes. The Final Problem was published in this series, and that remains one of the top Sherlock Holmes stories of all time, as Doyle was determined to kill off Sherlock Holmes, his most famous character, due to not simply its popularity, but how Holmes in many ways had taken over the life of Doyle the writer. I hope you'll take this opportunity to not simply listen to this podcast series, but also to reread the stories in the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Today we begin a special two-part episode on the final story from the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, The Final Problem. In this short story, Holmes confronts his arch nemesis Moriarty, and in today's episode, we begin our look at that story. If you've enjoyed this series or enjoy Sherlock Holmes, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever great podcasts are listened to. Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. We're going to have a quick word from our network sponsor, Ethico, then we'll be right back.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting case closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, 2023, The Year in Compliance. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
This is Tom Fox again, and I'd like to welcome you to Season 3 of Adventures in Compliance. Over the next 14 episodes, we're going to look at the stories from the Return of Sherlock Holmes. In this, we learned that the rumors of Sherlock Holmes' demise at the end of Season 2 were somewhat exaggerated, and we thrill at his new series of intellectual gymnastics. The first puzzle to confront for Conan Doyle, however, was how did Sherlock Holmes survive what must have surely been a fatal tumble from the Reichenbach Falls? Holmes had determined that for the new series to work successfully, he needed to advance Holmes' career. Far easier, though it would have been to simply allow Dr. Watson to nostalgically go back through a dozen older stories and cases, all solved before Holmes' death. But that would have required no small amount of fact-checking, ensuring, and continuity of the original tales. Dipping back into Holmes' earlier life to unearth further adventures that predated his meeting with Watson was thrown aside for the same reason by Holmes. As so many authors have discovered in the years of radio, movies, and television, the best heroes all need a sidekick, whether it's Tonto, Robin, or Robin Hood's Merry Men. It gives them somebody to talk to, somebody to show off to, and somebody they can rely upon when things go awry. There are other difficulties as well. A decade had passed since Holmes' death, and a period during which the world had galloped on without him. How, for instance, would Holmes cope with the invention of the telephone, the growing preponderance of motor cars, the death of the Queen, and the ascension of King Edward VII? All of these events and discoveries would have a major effect upon the life of Holmes, but Conan Doyle did not want to involve them, so he didn't. Just as the first two sets of stories were published in the early 1890s, several years before So a new series could pick up essentially from that point going forward. Just 3 years having elapsed from the momentous events on a Swiss mountainside. Watson got on with his life. His practice flourished. His days were busy. And although he's now a widower, his wife's final days were at least gratified by the knowledge he was no longer disappearing for days on end, pursuing another of Holmes' harebrained schemes. So we rejoin the great Sherlock Holmes walking down the street as just if it's another day in London, England. I would, however, like to go over some of the theories about what happened during the great hiatus. First is fundamentalism. A substantial group of scholars accept Holmes' tale of travels to Tibet, Persia, Mecca, Egypt, and France as essentially true, although lacking in explanation. The most detailed study is that of Carson Simpson, and it consists of 4 volumes. Simpson considers Holmes' homeward trip in detail, setting forth voluminous background materials on the then current situation in a variety of countries and locales mentioned, and explored the precise routes which Holmes traveled. Next up, others consider the possible messages sent by Holmes. One investigates Holmes' use of the name Sigerson as a code or cipher to inform Mycroft of the location where he is hiding or seeking seclusion. In addition, reports from Sigerson possibly carried vital information to Mycroft about the political situation of each company. Another author, Patricia Dodd, in her work Communicating in Code, suggests during the great hiatus, Holmes continued to keep in touch with both Mycroft and Watson through an intricate series of coded networks and communications. In the no deposit, no return school of thought, it's that the great hiatus frankly never happened. The argument is that Holmes did not return because he'd never been away. Not only was Holmes in London living with Watson in the same house, it was Watson who deceived us. I find it difficult to believe that Watson would do so. A third school writes under the name of the different journey, and they construct different itineraries for the great hiatus. One, of course, is traveling through Tibet. Another concludes that Holmes married Irene Adler. Wouldn't that have been something? And a third says that Holmes stayed near London, finding yet another better half. Whichever you believe or disbelieve, it's a great set of stories for everyone to engage in. The great hiatus is something that certainly still enthralls Holmes aficionados of all types. I hope you will join me for the next 13 episodes where we take up the return of Sherlock Holmes. We're going to start with one of my personal favorites, The Empty Room. I hope you'll join me for this exploration of the return of Sherlock Holmes in Adventures in Compliance. Compliance Podcast Network is sponsored this month by Ethico. Ethico is a leader for compliance champions like yourself with its ethics and compliance optimization system built to turn goals and guidelines into real ROI for your program. For more information and a special white paper, go to ethico.com/CPN. I hope you will join me through this entire series of short stories from the return of Sherlock Holmes. If you're a Holmes fan or you enjoy analogizing to compliance, leadership, and ethics, this is the podcast series for you. I hope you will take the opportunity to reread one or perhaps all of the short stories. They're short reads and a lot of fun. I'm going to be taking a deep dive into each one of them, looking at leadership lessons, ethical lessons, and or compliance lessons from each one. If you're a Sherlock Holmes aficionado like myself, I'd love to visit with you about some of your favorite stories and perhaps record a podcast or two with you on them. So please contact me you can reach me through the website of the Compliance Podcast Network. Adventures in Compliance is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. And as I mentioned, we are sponsored this month by Ethico. So I hope you will check out the Ethico white paper that's available through their special link on that we put in the show notes that I mentioned earlier. This is Tom Fox. I'm greatly looking forward to the return of Sherlock Holmes. Number 9, continuous learning. Holmes is continuously expanding his knowledge and skills, and compliance professionals must embrace continuous learning to stay updated, not simply on regulatory and legal changes, but also what's going on in your individual company and your business and your competitor's business so that you can be prepared. And finally, persistence. Sherlock Holmes never gives up on a case until it's solved. Every compliance professional must have perseverance and commitment to addressing compliance issues, even when faced with numerous obstacles. In conclusion, while the final problem may not directly relate to compliance, the principles embedded by Sherlock Holmes in this adventure can inspire and guide compliance professionals in your work to maintain ethical and legal standards in your organization. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review to Adventures in Compliance, wherever great podcasts are listened to, or perhaps even on YouTube. I also hope that you will take this opportunity to reread some of the great Conan Doyle short stories found in the collected works, the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. If you'd like to take a deep dive into a particular short story, I'd love to visit with you. So please give me a shout at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I hope you will join me again next week where I continue my look at this, in many ways, the best Sherlock Holmes story, but certainly one of the most interesting, The Final Problem. This is Tom Fox. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to visiting with you again next week.